Hey guys, welcome to the Pro Show. We're here for episode 3 of this show, a bit of an impromptu recording here on Sunday morning. I don't know how many people will tune in live, but we had a fun opportunity this morning. If this is your first time tuning in, I'm Brad Williams of the Closing Guys. I'm joined here by my dad today, and we have a special guest. Why don't you introduce him, Dad?
Okay. Well, my name is Don Williams, and we have Gary McKinney here from Asheville. He is actually a building inspector, a code inspector. And Gary and I grew up together. We actually met when we were probably 6 years old.
First grade.
And have been lifelong friends. And we both became general contractors in our early 30s, late 20s, early 30s. Mm-hmm. Lifelong construction experience. And about, 15 years ago, you became a building inspector.
16 years ago this April.
16 years ago. So quite a bit of experience from that standpoint. So initially you were a field inspector.
That's correct.
But what are you doing today?
I'm the residential plan reviewer for the municipality that I work in.
Okay.
So I think it's kind of interesting, almost ironic. Dad and I have ended up becoming home inspectors. And while inspector is in both of those names, they're definitely different jobs. And, as we go through home inspections, and we were talking to Gary, and, he does his job, sometimes people get confused about what one does, what the other does, where they cross over, and what that means when people are buying a house. So I thought, what a great way to kind of discuss some of these differences and some of the other issues that people face. I know there's a lot of questions that come up for the county code inspector during the home buying process, so we just thought we'd talk a little bit about that this morning.
Yeah, while we as home inspectors don't inspect per code, but we do consider code whenever we are inspecting. But every once in a while, I'll come up with a code question, and I'll call my good friend Gary here because he keeps up on the latest, whatever the latest code is. But it's really interesting. Before we get into that, if we were to cite code, we have to not only address the issue, it has to be addressed per the date that the home was built, or if improvements were made, when that improvement was made.
And what the current code was at that time. So as home inspectors, it's usually best for us to just avoid the topic of whether something is code or not, because it can get pretty complicated. I mean, you don't know, did somebody change the electrical out in the house in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s,
Exactly.
10 years ago? I mean, that makes for a big difference in some of the code regulations. So, for example, one of the big things we see with electrical is where GFCI was required and not. So we call it as a safety thing. But from a code perspective, what were the changes with that, just for example?
Well, I mean, every code cycle, which can go anywhere from 3 to 6 years, the code council will come up with places where maybe it's always based on life safety issues. And so if the code council decides that there needs to be GFIs in any wet areas, of course, then they will make the changes in the code, which will become current when that code cycle comes around.
So maybe we'll talk a little bit about the differences of when a county inspector would be involved versus a home inspector. As a home inspector, we work for the client, and our report is the property of the client. And what's interesting and something that we face as a big misconception is what we find is totally up to the person that's hired us as to whether they address it or not, how they address it, and what they do with it. How is that different from a county inspector?
Well, to be a state certified inspector, it literally takes 6 years. You start out in a probationary type application, and then and within 2 years you get your level 1, which helps you to inspect residential mostly, very little commercial, and then you apply for a probationary 2, which gets you even higher of what more you can inspect. Pretty much all of residential, but still some limited commercial. And then in another 2 years, you become a level 3, which is as high as you can go. And at that point, you can inspect anything from high-rise to tiny homes. But we take that home from literally the footings all the way to the finals. And it could be some 14 different inspections through the course of building that house. And we look at everything that pertains to code. So anything structural, anything electrical, mechanical, or plumbing, all of that from rough end to finals, in the building aspect, anywhere from footings to finals, we look at every bit of it and make sure that it meets minimum code requirements.
So if it doesn't meet a code requirement, where can you go with that?
We flag it. We tell them, we're public servants, and so we sit down with the contractor. Mostly we deal with contractors. A lot of owner builders anymore, but we go through what they're going to have to change to make it meet code, or what they have to do to at least. We don't like alternative methods too much because sometimes that can come back, but. We try to work it out to where they can finally become code compliant and keep going with the building of the home.
So you would cite whatever issue was not
Right.
code compliant,
Right.
And then it would be they're required to bring that to.
They
code.
have to do it before we can get the next. They can't get any more inspections until that one's approved. So they have to make the corrections.
Right.
Yeah, and this is something that comes up a lot. You guys do pass or fail. There is a red
Right.
and a green sticker, right?
Right.
And that's one thing that we get asked a lot. This shows the misconceptions about what inspectors do. We show up to houses and clients will be like, "So, you think my house is going to pass today?" And I'm thinking, that's not what we do, and that's the big difference. But county inspectors do. It's a requirement. So everything
Right.
you guys, if you come out and you guys say this has to be done, they have to do it, or they can't get a certificate of occupancy.
Exactly. And we're really there to protect the homeowner. Not that and the contractor too. We make sure that contractor is doing it appropriately, but really we're there to protect the homeowner, that they're going to get the home that they're paying for, that they permitted. So
I'd say that's how we are, as much as anything. That is how we are alike. We're all about safety. Same thing with a code inspector.
That's
It's all
correct.
about safety. It's all about ensuring that the occupant of the home or guest
right.
are safe in that home.
Yeah, as far as our board is concerned, we are there to protect public interest. So I think that is the common ground,
Right.
definitely. Kind of diving into something that we see a whole lot of. We get to a house and inspect it, and a lot of times we'll see evidence of renovation. And there's
Yeah.
a lot of question about what people should and shouldn't have done. So maybe we can go through a few different topics about what's required, what's not. So
what to start with? What are the, if someone wants to, let's say they want to put a deck on a house, does that require a permit?
Absolutely. Anything structural, electrical, mechanical, or plumbing, other than just maybe swapping out one water closet for another, or maybe swapping out your sink faucet, you can do that without a permit. Anything cosmetic you can do without a permit. If you want to put new flooring down, new cabinets, those kind of things, if it's cosmetic, does not have to be permitted. Now, the state does have a $15,000 rule that's found in the general statutes that if your project exceeds $15,000, then it should have a building permit. So there is a lot of confusion. I get a lot of calls from realtors almost on a daily basis where they're getting ready to list a house and they say, "Hey, I think this person has finished out their basement, or I think they've added on to their house and they never was permitted. What do I need to do?" Well, that can be very simple or it can be very complicated. It falls on the homeowner's shoulders. And the buyer, if the buyer knows, it needs to be permitted, number one. So we don't care if it's the seller or the buyer. I always tell the realtor, hey, I'd make the seller pull the permits and go through the process, because sometimes you may have to take all the sheetrock down because inspectors are not going to pass something they cannot see. So it can be very complicated. If they've added bedrooms without more septic systems, if they've put in apartment down there they're going to rent out, I mean, that could require some separation issues, like a floor ceiling assembly that would have to be a 1-hour rating. And so those kind of things become very complicated. You're going from a single family site built home to a duplex, which requires 2 meters on the house. I mean, these things can get very complicated. Homeowners think, hey, it's my house, I can do what I want. The problem is they're only going to live in that house about 7 years and they're going to sell it, And so the next guy is stuck, is hung out to dry to get this thing permitted and done correctly.
I think that you raised an interesting point in your comment there. Who is responsible? And I think I heard you say it's the current owner. So if they close on the house and there's a permitting issue, the new owner,
that's exactly
whoever
right.
is the current owner.
That's exactly right. And we have a lot of times, we have the option of doubling a permit fee as a fine. I don't do that too much. If a buyer has bought a house and they didn't realize that something had been done, which is highly unusual because usually the realtor knows, I won't double their fee. We'll just help them get it permitted and then get started because it may require a lot of disassembling. Mm-hmm. And that causes a lot of anger issues.
Yeah. So that could change from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So what you do in your jurisdiction, the local planning or
That's
inspectors
correct.
may do different here in Forsyth or Guilford County or whatever. So it may be addressed a little bit different, but the general statutes are the same.
Well, a state code, no matter what part of North Carolina, there's 100 counties in North Carolina, and no matter what county, we're all bound by the same state code. So those things have to be permitted and inspected so that we can get, like you said, a certificate of occupancy for that particular habitable space.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say somebody has added some bedrooms in a house with a septic system, and now all of a sudden they've exceeded it. What are they facing? What will that mean?
That means they're going to have to start digging up their yard and put in more septic lines. I mean, bedrooms, septic systems are based on bedrooms. Usually your city sewer type situations are based on bathrooms. So if you've added more bedrooms onto a system that's only for a 3-bedroom house and you've added another bedroom, you have to add more lines. And a lot of times, environmental health, who does our septics, they have to get involved. And if they come out and go, you don't perk for any more lines, they've got to they got to disassemble that bedroom. They cannot have it because obviously it's going to ruin the system. There's still going to be too much volume going into that system, and it's just going to ruin the system they've got.
Sometimes there's options. I know you're not with the health department, but sometimes there's options where they can do an engineered system, a modified system, a panel system, that kind of thing. So it's not automatically the end of the world, but it could be. I mean,
usually though, those kind of systems are in the $20,000 to $30,000 range, and a lot of people go, I can't do that.
It may be cost prohibitive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So as a buyer of a home, realizing that once you take over that house, it's your responsibility. You need to do your due diligence.
You better believe it. And I tell them all the time, let the seller go through the permitting process. And most of the 90% of them will listen to me and make the seller do it. But some people want that house so bad they're willing to go through it. But that's a negotiating tool for them as well. Hey, I'm going to have to do this. I wanted you to knock off another certain amount of money, so that I can do all this.
What is the regulation, or what would be required? We see a lot of unpermitted space added in basements and stuff like that. And sometimes they won't even put ventilation in. Is that just I can't count? I mean, as far as realtors are concerned, they're like, well, I can't count that as finished space. No. What does that mean for the person, though, as far as your perspective?
Well, they have to permit it. Bottom line, they can finagle it and rationalize it any way they want, but the bottom line is, once it's in our radar, once it comes to our attention what's going on, we don't just let it slide. If they go ahead and close and think this is going to go away, we wind up knocking on the door and saying, here, you're going to permit this.
So let's talk about why that would be. It really is a safety issue.
It's a life safety. If people are doing, a lot of homeowners do their own electrical, probably have no experience at all. I mean, and a lot of them do their own plumbing, and the plumbing may not work. And bless their hearts, I know they're trying to save money, but the problem is if it's not gone through the inspections, our guys are professionals. They know what to look for. They know what's supposed to meet code. And a lot of people want to save that $200 permit fee and do it themselves, and it definitely is a life safety issue.
Yeah.
So can you add a bedroom in a basement without a window in it?
No, absolutely not.
I think we went in one house, and I think they'd added like 3 bedrooms in the basement, and they were all interior rooms. And that's not just that's not an aesthetic issue. That's a egress fire safety
That
issue.
is a blatant code violation that really those particular homes need to be shut down because someone could die. I mean, if fire breaks out, the only way to get that person out sometimes is through a window. If the whole hallway or other rooms are on fire, that person's gone. They can't get them out. So absolutely, every sleeping quarter, every basement, every sleeping quarter, every habitable attic has to have egress out of it.
What's the definition of that egress? What does that have to?
If it's a window, it has to meet 4 criteria. You're talking let's say it's a double hung, you're sliding up that bottom sash, then we're talking about the clear span, the part you crawl out of. That has to meet a minimum of 22 inches high, 20 inches wide, but it also has to make up 4 square feet. So it can't just make the 22 by 20 because that doesn't make up 4 square feet. Also, the bottom of that window can't be higher than 44 inches off the finished floor. So an egress window, that's why when I get plans in, I make them give me the size of that window. I want to know the size. Don't just write egress on it. They have to give me the size of the window. So, and many times those windows, I'll give you for instance, if, let's say, well, the window's already existing. Well, that bedroom was created. You went down there and you made another bedroom. That way, that window's going to meet egress. There's just no choice. And a lot of times they'll have to take out the double hung and put a casement in to make this thing work egress. But sometimes, like you were saying, there's backfill, 9 feet high on that wall. They can't get a window in. Now, the code does make provisions for window wells.
Right.
And so they could do that, but that's going to be costly to them. And a lot of times they've got, extra kids or whatever, and they're trying to make bedrooms for. But that's very, very dangerous without an egress.
What about adding or replacing HVAC systems? Does that require a permit?
Absolutely.
And that would also apply to, say you had an old house that had a
service
electrical
change
panel and they wanted a new one?
Yeah.
All those things.
Yeah. Anything structural. Let's say I want to add a sunroom to my house. I want to take out this whole 20 feet of exterior wall. Oh, man, you better believe that's got to be permitted.
Even if it's not habitable space and it's just an enclosed sunroom with no ventilation, it still has to be permitted.
Absolutely.
What are the criteria of that? What's this? Does that have to be a certain size? Is it
anything structural?
Okay.
Anything structural. And there's no monetary value to it. Whatever is structural has to be permitted. I don't care if you're putting a header over a window. You're increasing your window size, and you're putting that header in. That's a structural thing, and we got to, if it's carrying a floor and ceiling and roof load, I mean that header's got to be much bigger than what you would normally think you could get in there. So it's all based on loads.
Right. So don't be knocking out the walls in your house without a permit.
Please don't do that.
I see buyers come through house and I hear the word, we'll just blow this wall out here or whatever, and I'm thinking, man, you have been watching HGTV.
Oh my.
So let's go back to the basement, a finished space in the basement. One of the things that we see every once in a while is maybe they'll put a bathroom in where the electrical panel is there close by, or a closet. They'll make a closet and there's an electrical panel.
Can't put a lamp panel in a closet.
Okay, that's a good point. You cannot put an electrical panel in the closet, and because that's a fire issue. That's a fire safety issue. Or if you had a gas furnace and you had a big open space before, and then you put a bedroom or whatever, and it kind of closes that gas furnace off into a restricted area.
Sometimes you got to bring in combustion air from the outside. It's got a gas furnace especially has to have more copious volumes of air for circulation because of the gas.
Yeah. So if they would permit that and they had an inspector come in, they would know that they could not do that, and that's a safety issue, because if it doesn't get combustible properly, make up air,
that's
it will
exactly
actually create carbon monoxide.
Yeah. So there's a reason. The code is your minimum code requirement, minimum building requirements. And to be perfectly honest with you, I wouldn't want to live in a home that's just built to code, because they're the least energy efficient, the least everything about it just barely gets by. And so your good builders are going to exceed code.
I think that is a really important thing. I'm just going to say that again. Building code is a minimum to which things can be. It's not a lofty target that you should try to avoid. It's a minimum that everything should get to. What are some of the interesting things that you see or run across that people tend to do in renovation or
Well, of course, the biggest thing is the headers and the girder systems they put in. Many times on the plans, I'm constantly making changes to. They're overspanning. They're overspanning. Right. They're growing wood so quickly now that you can no longer span a 2x10 or 2x8 as much as you used to be able to. 10 years ago, you could span a 2x10 floor joist 16 feet. Now they're down to 14 feet because the species of wood is growing so fast, it's not as strong as it used to be. So you take your girders where you had a main girder going down through a floor that was a triple 2x10 that used to be able to span 9 feet. Now you can only span about 6.5 feet. And that depends on if it's a truss roof or stick frame roof and there's more load. You take a house that's, let's say, is 2 stories and a roof and everything's stick frame, that's 120 pounds per square foot. You got to make sure that main girder in that house is not going to get deflection to where you're walking through that floor and it's like walking on an ocean wave. Those girders.
We've seen that. Yeah.
So, they've overspanned their floor joists, they've overspanned their girders, they've got major problems. You can fix the girder. You can go in and add more post and fix that girder, but that floor, you're going to have to add more girders. If you've overspanned your floor joist, you can't do that. You've got to, in that case, add more girders in mid-span or whatever underneath that floor joist.
So you mentioned earlier, pre-show, that you do talks with real estate agents.
Yes.
What are some of the main questions that kind of arise from real estate agents?
The one that I get tickled at the most is they'll call, or I can go and they'll say, I'm getting ready to list this house and I think they've done this. And which tells me, no, they've done this. You just want me to give you a quick outlet of how to get this thing back on track. And there's no quick way. They have to come in with plans. They've got to permit it. They've got to go through all the process of for instance, energy. The insulation values, against a masonry wall, you have to have the 2012 code said it was either R10 continuous or R13. Well, that changed January 1st of this year. We went to the 2018 code. Now you got to have R10 or R15. If you studded that wall out against the masonry wall, that wall has to be insulated to R15 now. And before it was R13. Well, if it's all sheetrock, that inspector goes in and he goes, what kind of insulation did you put in? Oh, it was code. And so he says, well, cut me a hole in the wall and let me see. And it's R11. And it's, oh my goodness. It really can turn into a complicated mess. Everybody did it to code until you make them prove it. And suddenly you find out nothing meets code.
But it's pretty much, everything is fixable. It's just
it's
really
fixable.
It's the cost involved.
Exactly.
What it may or may not be. So
what I tell people is, look, you're going to have to find an electrician, a plumber, and a mechanical person that's willing to go into this finished area and take this work on, even though they didn't do it, because they have to list the trades on their applications to get a building permit. And so those guys at that point go in, the tradespeople, the subcontractors, and they may have to add more receptacles, or they may have to add a better venting system for the plumbing, or may have to update the heating system because it's just too light. And so it can be very complicated and costly.
Is there a kind of a time frame that you can go back to? Are there records? Is there a certain amount of records that you have that show whether it was permitted or not permitted?
Right. If someone the state requires us to keep records only 8 years, which is kind of sad because you get a lot of houses that were built 20 years ago, and I can't prove or disprove it was permitted. Sometimes we'll have some that'll linger 9 or 10 years, the records, but if someone comes up and says, hey, this house was built in 2000, and I don't know if this was permitted or not. Well, I can't prove it. I can't prove or disprove. And those are a judgment call. Sometimes we'll do a site visit and look at it, and look at it to the point where we think maybe at that point maybe it was permitted. But I can't sit there and claim or disclaim that it was permitted. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
From our perspective, when we go into a space of basement finished area, not always, but sometimes it's pretty evident that it's maybe a do-it-yourselfer type thing. We went in a house here recently that had a finished basement, and it was just minimally done. I mean, you could just look at the casings around the doors, and I mean
how they finished the floors, and
it was pretty obvious that they had either they'd done it themselves or they had some really bad sub help. But what we would say, we would just basically cite the things that we actually were evident. But we don't check into, to see if it was permitted when we don't, go beyond that. But so if, let's say in this situation that you're talking about, what would you look for when you came in? Would you just look for code violations, basically?
Yeah, you're not going to see too much on the building side. What we'd probably do is send a plumbing and a electrical inspector in there and let them look. And, they can pretty much tell if it was done to code or if it was just a homeowner looking at YouTube trying to figure out how to wire his basement. And they can look at the panel box and see if it's the right size, circuit breakers or whatever. So there's these guys are sharp. I mean, a lot of times they'll put in Studer vents, because they can't get to the main venting, and those are probably done wrong. And so those guys, and then they can come back out and go, no, this was never permitted. We would have never let this pass. And so we'll tell the homeowner, we're pretty confident that this was never permitted. You need to come in permit and do it right if you're going to continue to use this space.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, we see some really creative plumbing and electrical. I had a question, I think about things needing to be brought up to code. So let's say somebody decides to upgrade some of their electrical. Does that mean all of it has to be brought up to code?
No. If we will only inspect what they permit. Let's say that they were going to add on to their house. We would only look at what they've permitted. We can't make them update their whole system in the house if all we're doing is they're just adding a bathroom or a little sunroom or something like that, and they're adding some switches and plugs. We don't make them update the whole house. No, you can't do that. I hope we never get to that point. Mm-hmm. A lot of times, though, let's take the heating system. A lot of times builders will size that heating system for just what was finished out at the time. And so 5 years later, the homeowner decides, I'm going to finish out and add another 1,000 square feet of heated space. That's where, a homeowner will call us and go, hey, my heating system's, we're cold all the time, or it's not doing its job. And we go, well, was it permitted? Well, I thought the guy that did the work did the permitting. We hear this a lot. I thought, then you call the contractor, he goes, well, I thought the homeowner got the permit. And so finally we say, no, somebody come in and get the permit, And but it gets comical sometimes. Mm-hmm. It really does.
Yeah, so not only does it heat and cool the space, but did they upgrade the electrical to accommodate the new system? A lot of the newer systems have a higher efficiency,
right,
and may require more, or actually could require less, and you don't want it to have more protection of the system.
No, if it's not permitted, and we're trying to get it out, at least in the municipality I work in, we've got most of the electricians, the plumbers, and the heating people to the point where if someone calls them and says, hey, come and do my electrical, they go, you have a permit? And if a homeowner says no, then they go, we're not going to do it. Mm-hmm. Or we're going to pull our own permit, which creates a whole new set of problems, because now it gives us the right to be in that basement. And when we're in there, we know right off the bat, wait a minute, you need a building permit. This was never permitted. We know that. And so that's when the anger starts from the homeowner.
Right. So the bottom line is, with all that, just get a permit, do it
not that
properly,
expensive.
take care of it, as it needs to be taken care of.
And it protects you as the homeowner to do that. You get
That's the hardest thing to convey to them. We're protecting you.
Yeah.
But
I know that we just might hear the attitude every once in a while. Well, the government, they just want to charge us more taxes or whatever. It's just a way for them to make more money, and that's really not the case. I mean,
we lose money on permits. If someone's adding a sunroom to their house, that permit may only be $150. and yet our inspectors may make 6 trips out there. And we base everything on $75 a trip. Well, that permit should have cost close to $500. It cost them $150. We lose money on a lot of permits. So they don't realize permitting is not that expensive, at least not in North Carolina and in our municipality.
Right. Did you have any other questions?
I'm good.
Anything else you want to add that for homeowners or prospective buyers?
Yeah, just call and ask. Call the county or the city, and ask them questions. I'm getting ready to do this. What am I? Give me some direction on this. What should I do? Because we get a lot of calls from people saying, I didn't realize I had to permit my own house. And I don't know where that mentality comes from, but they go, I thought I could do anything I wanted without a permit since it's my own personal house. But that's so not right, because state code is for every house, not just spec houses.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And in this case, unlike I think what people feel about a lot of things, you're a lot better off to ask for permission than to be on the back end. It's a lot cheaper to ask.
Absolutely, because they could get so complicated and costly if you didn't permit it. You save $200, it's going to wind up maybe costing you tens of thousands of dollars.
Right. Well, thanks for doing this, Gary.
Well, thank you for having me.
I think that there's some really good information in here.
Yeah, kind of sum up the difference again between what we do and what.
Okay, so just to kind of sum it up, home inspectors are hired by a client to take a snapshot of a home's function. We test what the homeowner would use. We test the systems. We look at it from a performance standpoint, less than a design standpoint.
Right.
And when county officials are looking at it, they're looking at it from a code and design standpoint,
right,
and letting you know whether you met a regulation. Theirs are enforced. Ours are just a simple list for the people. So I think it's important when you go into that, when you're buying a house, if you have question about how something was done and if it was done properly, you need to get in touch with your county building official and do some due diligence there. But that's different than getting the home inspection, where we're kind of going to they're not going to go through and test all the light switches and run all the bathtubs and run the HVAC and all that. We're going to go through and give you a good punch list of the home's condition,
right,
not the home's design. So does that sum it up pretty good?
What are your
and I think there's a value for both. Let us build the houses or be involved in the building the house, but home inspectors are great to let the buyer know what really has worn out on that house over the years and needs to be replaced.
Yeah, good point.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us on this pro show. We will be back later this week with a show talking all about mold, so that should be fun. All right, bye guys.